you'll feel better.
Technology has done wonders for mankind. It took us all the way from using tools made of stone to ingenious machinations that are able to surpass basic human comprehension. All of that to make our daily lives easier. Innovations really came about particularly in the last century following massive advancements in computing, which enabled us to blow past new heights of human achievement. With the help of this technology, our lives drastically changed through the years of advancements, and this change overhauled pretty much every industry we know. One such industry is the gaming industry, which not only has a very unique history, but one that is sprinkled with incredibly rich stories. Naturally, as tech advances, it is a given that something will always be left behind, and as such, there is a branch of gaming platforms that has been dying out in recent years, despite the significance it had and the reformations and cultural revolutions it brought about. We're talking about arcade gaming. Many of you may not know this, but arcade games is actually a broad term which includes arcade video games as well as other games of either chance or skill. While each has a rich history, we'll be sticking to what we know best, the dawn of arcade video games and their fall in recent years. While many would associate arcade games with Japan and the Japanese, the first arcade game was actually American. The video game that would lead to the birth of arcade games was Space War, which was developed by the staff and students at MIT. Future Atari founder Nolan Bushnell was invited by a colleague to see Space War and was immediately hit with the idea of recreating the game on a smaller computer with coin-operated terminals. Fast forward to some big-name connections and phone calls, he made it happen. This led to the release of Space War as a rebranded game that was called Computer Space, and this happened after some location tests. Thus, the first commercially available arcade video game had seen the light. Although Computer Space was not as much of a hit as Bushnell had hoped it would be, it served a much more important purpose, proving the potential of arcade video games. Right alongside Computer Space, another technological innovation was brewing, the Magnavox Odyssey.
Odyssey, the electronic game of the future. Odyssey easily attaches to any brand TV, black and white or color, to create a closed-circuit electronic playground. Odyssey gives you all the exciting action of hockey and 11 other challenging play and learning games for the entire family.
Many of you may remember playing Pong at home. Well, this became possible due to the release of the Odyssey, marking the start of the first ever video game console generation. Although it fizzled out and wasn't much of a success, it introduced many innovations such as the use of cartridges and multiple detachable controllers. All those fancy DualSense controllers and arcade sticks? Yeah, you owe the comfort of playing with the boys to this beauty of a machine. Atari then went on to release not only Pong in arcade cabinets, but also released its own console, the Atari Home Pong. The Atari Home Pong went on then to inspire Nintendo to create its very first console as well, the Color TV game. Many of you know the Nintendo of today as a gaming giant, but this is how it became so. Soon after, Pong became a massive success in not only the West but the East as well. It led multiple coin-operated arcade machine manufacturers to capitalize on Pong's success by making their own machines. And when they did this, they pretty much copied Atari's games with little changes, along with some of their own novel creations. Among these companies were Sega and Taito, which are still strong contenders today. The arcade gaming industry was becoming so successful that by 1974, just 2 years after Pong's release, 15 companies now wanted a piece of the pie, including Japanese ones, and the industry was seeing spikes in innovations. During these years, arcade video games were still considered adult entertainment, and so arcade cabinets were typically marketed and placed in locations not typically accessible by children. However, arcade games started entering the limelight, and one of the reasons was 1976's Death Race, which involved driving over gremlins. You may already know about this because it caused controversy in the USA due to its violent content and sparked the first major debate on violence and video games. Although these debates continue to this day, it was Death Race that brought significant attention to games and arcades. Arcade gaming entered a period of stagnation by the end of 1975, and this pretty much continued till 1978 when the mega hit known as Space Invaders was released by Taito. Said to be the first ever blockbuster arcade video game, it created the template for the shoot 'em up genre, and this game had many new features that were not typically seen in other games of the time, such as being the first game to keep a persistent high score. Space Invaders became such an important part of pop culture at the time that it was immortalized, and even those of you who might have not played the game may have at least heard about it. The game was very successful in both Japan and the USA, and is considered responsible for starting the period often called the Golden Age of arcade games. There were multiple games by many companies that were massive successes in this period, like Asteroid, Missile Command, Centipede by Atari, Scramble and Frogger by Konami, Galaxian and Galaga, and Pac-Man by Namco. And of course, we can't forget the big two, Donkey Kong and Mario Brothers by Nintendo. Pac-Man in particular became both insanely famous and a huge part of pop culture, inspiring a popular song and having merchandise and even an animated series in 1982.
That's right, and your pack leader should be here any minute.
Arcade games had now started to become famous, and there was a boom in video game arcades throughout the world, with dedicated stores as well as cabinets in amusement parks and popular places. With persistent high scores now possible, official documentation of scores started by independent entities and publications to determine who was the greatest in any given video game. This is what laid the early groundwork for esports. However, all this hype and excitement led to one fatal flaw: overindulgence and saturation. Many cashed in on the opportunities the golden age of arcade gaming was providing, and so there was an overabundance of not only games but also arcade cabinets and home consoles. There were many low-quality games made by comparatively new developers wanting to make a quick buck, but nobody actually wanted their games. All this accumulated and exploded into the video game crash of 1983. There was less new content due to overabundance, and many players who looked for new challenges were now turning away. An important thing of note is that E.T. the Extraterrestrial, the game by Atari for its console, based on the film of the same name, is considered by many to be one of the main causes of the crash of 1983, as the reception was absolutely horrible and resulted in huge losses for Atari. This also caused debt and massive layoffs, which resulted in the infamous Atari video game burial. The arcade game market eventually recovered somewhat though, and this was due to the resurgence and release of martial arts games, beat-em-ups, games with advanced motion simulation, and a renewed interest in sports games. Popular games during this period were Double Dragon, Kung Fu Master, Renegade, Street Fighter, Space Harrier, Outrun, Punch-Out, Splatterhouse, and so many more. Various technical advancements were made around this time, and among these was the Namco System 21, which helped arcade games move towards 3D polygonal games. These games included Street Fighter, the first game ever to introduce a competitive fighting game format, but it lacked polish. With the 90s came the boom in arcade games yet again, particularly arcade fighting games. This was brought about by Street Fighter II, which introduced many mainstays and hallmark features of fighting games that can be seen to this day. Street Fighter II was extremely popular and boosted arcade sales throughout the world. It single-handedly brought about a revival of arcades, and competitors soon followed in the shape of Mortal Kombat, Virtua Fighter, Tekken, and various Neo Geo fighting games. So eventually, arcade gaming came back in the USA as well, but from the mid-90s and onwards, the fifth generation of 3D-capable consoles was garnering great reviews and attracting people away from arcades. These consoles were the PlayStation, Nintendo 64, and the Sega Saturn. Ever since, arcades have kept becoming more and more irrelevant, being only a niche market now. And through successive console generations and the prevalence of PC games with 3D graphics, arcades started to become less frequented in the USA. This was due to the convenience of home consoles and their increasingly strong technology and capabilities, not only pulling people away from arcade games, but also making sure that they were glued to their consoles and PCs. Part of the reason this happened was also because of the emergence of emulation of these arcade games on PCs and smartphones in later years. And around this time, increasing attention was being given to gimmick entertainment such as virtual reality rides or experiences. In Japan, however, arcade games remained pretty strong. They did start to see a decline in the mid to late 2000s though due to the economic recession and the increased prevalence of other forms of entertainment. And when we talk about this type of entertainment, we mean things like pachinko slots, games with redemption systems, and things like claw machines and phone booths. This is because in Japan, these games were existing within arcades along with video games. Despite all this though, the reason arcades are still so popular within Japan though is that they have essentially become a part of Japanese modern culture and are popular spots for tourism as well as business. And as a result, there are still many arcades in Japan as they are, many times owned by the company itself, although even those are on the decline. To counter this decline to some degree, Japanese companies also offer gimmicks and experiences that cannot be emulated at home. In recent years, this has been achieved through IR chip card experiences and more recently through unique VR experiences. However, this does not mean that they're not dying. Back in 2021, Japan Times reported that according to a police white paper, in 2019 there were only 4,022 arcades across Japan, down from 26,573 back in 1986. A far cry from arcade gaming's days of glory. And other sad news gamers worldwide received in January of this year was that after 50 years, Sega was selling and closing its arcade business. This came as a result of the COVID pandemic, as lockdown and social distancing caused heavy losses to many arcades throughout Japan, resulting in their closure. The increased accessibility of consoles and games has greatly contributed to the fall of arcade gaming as well. Mobile games have been pretty much on the rise in the gaming industry for quite some time, and right now they're the most profitable in the gaming industry, making up about 52% of their revenue according to recent reports. Ultimately though, games being conveniently accessible through phones and consoles, subscription passes like Game Pass, and even things like shifting cultures, arcade gaming is slowly being buried, as sad as it may be. Now, we've talked about the decline of arcade video games, and I think one decline is enough. I'm sure you want to avoid the decline of this channel, so go ahead, click that subscribe button. It's just like playing an arcade game, but you win by pressing just one big, shiny red button. Thank you.